Looks like we're live. Hey folks, Brother Sam here. Don't know if I'm going to get banned from YouTube for saying this, but let's talk about the election and what's going on. A lot of the prophets out there are currently walking back their original prophecies about Trump getting a second term. And I think no real prophet is going to walk back a prophecy because either God spoke through you or he didn't. And if you don't have confidence in what God spoke through you, then you need to shut up. Um, I'm going to say this. I think Trump set a trap for them. Now, I'm not. That's not a prophecy on my part. That's an educated opinion on what I'm able to observe. A lot of things are coming out now about massive, just rampant voter fraud, which the media and the big tech giants are really trying to squash right now. They're calling everything conspiracy theories or disinformation, and there is massive evidence of voter fraud. Last I checked, about 8 hours ago, there were over 11,000 reports of massive fraud being conducted at the polling stations and during the counts. Over 500 whistleblowers so far and counting. Now, before, when it was a hearsay whistleblower who didn't really have anything factual to say, the Democrats were saying we should listen to whistleblowers. Now they're acting like whistleblowers don't mean anything. And before this is all said, before all is said and done, we're probably going to have a couple thousand whistleblowers, and a lot more reports are going to come out. There's video. The Attorney General of Michigan is threatening someone with prosecution if he doesn't take on a video where he shows election officials training the poll workers in how to commit fraud. That we know of so far, they were doing things like going into nursing homes and registering dementia patients as voters and voting for them. We've had dead people voting. A lot of these fake ballots have as the date of birth January 1st, 1900. So apparently there's thousands and thousands of people just in one county who are 120 years old. Of course, statistically impossible. And you have a lot of things like that. Georgia has over 130,000 votes that are definitely going to get tossed out. Never mind the evidence of, and here's the keywords that might get me in trouble, hammer and scorecard. Hammer and scorecard are software tools that were developed by, I believe, the National Security Agency. They are signals intelligence software tools. And here's the problem with that. Somehow the Democrats thought they were going to use those tools and not get caught. There's no way NSA is going to come up with software and not have a way to track it. And Sidney Powell came on live TV a night or two ago and said that they have evidence that hammer and scorecard were used to flip votes from Trump to Biden. By their count, almost 4 million votes. And let's do some simple math. There's roughly 140 million registered voters in America. 145 million people voted. Something there doesn't add up. You look at Minnesota's 3.8 million registered voters, but over 5.1 million people voted. 5.1 million votes cast. So there have to be fraudulent ballots in Minnesota. There's no two ways around it. Some states had 125% voter turnout. That's impossible. You got more people voting than people that live there, or people who are registered to vote there. So there's going to be a lot of fake ballots being thrown out. There were ballots that arrived at the polling station before the date that the county sent them out. So either there are thousands and thousands of voters who apparently got a time machine, or somebody cheated. Then there's the accounts of a Biden-Harris campaign van showing up with a literal van load of votes for Biden. And it's, we're supposed to believe it's just a coincidence that in all these states you have the same anomaly where they stop the count, and then in the middle of the night, 100,000 votes show up, or 200,000 ballots show up, and every last one of them is for Biden. Not only are they for Biden, but these people didn't vote for anybody else. According to Sidney Powell, there's at least, I think, 450,000 ballots that only have a vote for the presidency and only for Biden, no one for Trump. Or almost no one for Trump, so that this doesn't add up. You're not gonna have that many people vote only for the presidency and nothing else, And you're certainly not going to find all those ballots in the same spot. That is a statistical impossibility. Then you have Benford's Law. The way the votes were coming in for Biden didn't make any sense. And then you could even watch it on TV that Trump would lose 19,685 votes, and in the same instant, Biden would gain 19,685 votes. So it was very obvious that the software was being used to move votes from Trump to Biden. And by that count, there's almost about 4 million of those, and there are literally millions of absolutely fake ballots. So before all this is said and done, we will find that Trump has actually won in a massive landslide. I suspect he may have even won California. Orange County, which might be one of the biggest counties in California, is heading toward a recount and an audit. And one thing the Democrats don't need is an audit, because an audit will turn up there's going to be dead people, there's going to be, a whole bunch of people who are 120 years old, there are going to be a whole bunch of dogs and cats that voted, people who don't even exist that voted, and then there's the hammer and scorecard thing. And well, before all this is said, this is the largest mass treason event that we have witnessed in our lifetime, part of the largest mass treason event in our nation's history. This is bigger than 9/11. This is the attempt to take over the United States through a fraudulent election. And I hope to God that and this is one of the things I've been praying for. I was praying for whistleblowers to come forward a couple days ago. Now we got to look over 500 of them. I've been praying for everything to be exposed, and this is what we need to be praying for, that everything is exposed, all the fraud is exposed, all the bad actors are exposed, all the way to the top of the chain of command, and that their connections to foreign powers are also incontrovertibly exposed. Because then it's more than election fraud, it's treason. And it's more than treason, it's high treason. Meaning some people are going to have to be executed. And the media has been entirely complicit. Social media has been complicit. It has been complicit. So if all this stuff comes out, who gets to walk away from this? Will Jack Dorsey walk away from this? I don't think so. I doubt it. Will Mark Zuckerberg walk away from this when we find out his financial connections to the voter fraud efforts? Or he thinks it's just a coincidence that every place he poured money into had massive voter fraud? Now that's just circumstantial, but enough digging will expose things. And even now, people who work for the company that makes those voting machines, which oddly enough are owned by family members of Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, what a shock there. People who work for that company are coming forward and saying, yes, we were ordered to break the machines. And there's apparently a whole lot of video. By some counts, there may be video of thousands and thousands of instances of serious, large-scale fraud. And which makes sense, because the guy who couldn't get 20 people to show up for a rally sure isn't going to get 75 million people to vote for him. That's just not happening. Because and people say, well, that's just, and I know people bought into the Kool-Aid that Facebook was saying, well, that reflects not support, but a different approach to campaigning. Really, before COVID-19, before the lockdowns, Biden was doing rallies that 50 people would show up, and half of them were his staff. I remember, people at my job, they're very pro-Biden, and it said, Trump and Biden did a rally in the same state today. Biden's rally had 35 people show up. Trump's had 80,000 show up. So even if we account for COVID-19, nobody for Biden was doing 93-mile-long car parades. The support isn't there. If you got that much support, you don't got to pay people to start riots. You don't have to drop off pallets of bricks. You don't have to pay people to protest. And you sure don't have to have fake rallies where 15 people show up and everybody's driving exactly the same kind of car. Or am I the only one who noticed that? But anyhow, I believe Trump set a trap for them. I have other suspicions that I won't verbalize, but I think he set a trap. Because there is an orgy of evidence, as they call it in the criminal justice system, when there's just so much evidence. It's ridiculous. They call it an orgy of evidence, and more evidence is going to come in. So all you prophets out there who are walking back your prophecies about a second Trump term, you're clowns. And saints, you need to stop listening to those prophets. Any prophet who does not have the confidence in the word of the Lord to stick with what God said, that's probably not even a real prophet of God anyway. I don't think there's ever been a time in my life where I prophesied something that I knew that God said it, and I ever walked it back. I didn't care who had a different opinion. I didn't care who called me a false prophet. I didn't care what anybody said. I didn't even care if I didn't believe it. And yes, I've had a couple prophecies over the years where I delivered a prophecy and I'm like, God, are you sure? It still came true. Because it wasn't my word, it was his. That's something we ought to understand. If it's really a word from God, it will come true. Now let's face it, this is the same guy who said, let there be light, and there was light. You're going to tell me Mr. Let There Be Light is going to say something and nothing's going to happen? Seriously? These prophets are clowns. So keep an eye on this, but I would say we still need to be interceding for the president and his people. We need to intercede for all these whistleblowers, for their safety. That we know of there are some bad federal agents tried to intimidate one of them already and tried to get him to walk back his statements. There's even state officials who are now coming out saying that they were cajoled into doing things. This is bigger than we thought. This is bigger than the so-called conspiracy theorists thought. This is the largest mass treason event in our nation's history, and we need to be praying. Because the other side has some really ugly plans. And if you think it's not possible, look at this. This is the year they shut your church down. This is the year they told you can't even have prayer meetings in your house. This is the year they'll send a SWAT team to shut your church down, but won't send anybody when there's a riot. Think about that. That is America's future if the Democrats get their way. That and worse. There are other things they want to do. So we need to pray for everything to come to light, for everything to be exposed. I am praying for no deals, no escape, no mercy for the bad actors. Now some people say that's not the Christian thing to do. You have no idea. In the Psalms, David prayed concerning his enemies, let death seize upon them. Let the angel of the Lord pursue them. That whole thing, love your enemies, wasn't necessarily about people who were trying to kill you. This is a war. We've been in a war this whole year, and most of us haven't realized it. And it is a spiritual war. A lot of people, and this is a mistake that we've made in the church. We've been lied to. And something you got to understand is not only have we been taught wrong, they taught us wrong on purpose. Because many of these preachers are part of a system of control. They've taught us to be indifferent about politics. And what happened while we were indifferent about politics? What happened? The enemy took over. We were indifferent about education. What happened to the universities? You send your kid to college, they come back an atheist. What happened in Hollywood? The enemy took over. Every single thing that the church taught us to be indifferent about, the enemy took over and has used to great effect for spiritual warfare. Because all of those things are spiritual. Education is spiritual. Politics is spiritual. If you think it isn't, you need to read the book of Isaiah again. And Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and Obadiah and the rest of them. Most of their prophecies revolve around politics. And many of these prophets in Scripture were politicians. Daniel was. Isaiah, Joseph, David. And the ones that weren't politicians, they were still involved in politics. They prophesied about politics. They were advisors to kings. It is time to stop being so indifferent. Now, maybe you can't do a whole lot, but there is something you can do. You can pray. You can fast. You can, we like to talk about decreeing and declaring. If you notice, that usually doesn't work. Because usually when we do that nonsense, they've taught us to do that, to seek our own will and not God's. How about loosing some things? I'll give you an example. I loose confusion to the minds of the Democrats and all their operatives. I loose chaos into their midst, that they would make mistakes, that they would expose themselves, that some of them would suddenly feel an inexplicable guilt and an uncontrollable urge to snitch. You think you can't do that? The Bible says, God said, the heart of the king is in my hand, and I turn it whatever way I want. The Bible says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God can make somebody do something. See, the modern church has taught you that, oh, God is a gentleman. He'll never subvert your will. Tell that to Paul. Tell that to Jonah. God will never violate your will, really. You can pray for stuff like that. It's all part of the plan. You're right about that. I was saying that earlier. I don't know if you were on here or not. That I believe that Trump set them up. And I said this last night. I very seriously doubt that a man who has spent possibly hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 40 years on surveillance for his casinos would have not have set up some kind of surveillance contingency for the elections. Think about it. You ain't getting any, you are not getting away with anything at any of Trump's casinos, are you? Try stealing something in a Trump casino, you're getting caught. There are cameras everywhere. And I don't know if we've gotten confirmation. Somebody thinks they may have actually put hidden cameras in the polling stations. If they did, oh man, a whole lot of people are going to prison for the rest of their natural life. Some may even get executed because this is high treason. And something you got to understand about the stakes. The stakes in this is not merely politics. The stakes is everything. They're going for the whole enchilada. Because if America falls, freedom falls everywhere. I don't say that out of a sense of patriotism or misplaced jingoism. I say that because America is one of the few countries where you can still kind of preach the gospel. And it is the biggest financier of the gospel worldwide. America falls, the gospel falls everywhere. Not that God can't still accomplish its purpose, but it will get a lot harder than it needs to be. I've heard that theory about the invisible watermarks. I don't think it's true because each state prints its own ballots. So I don't think that one is true. And the government agency they claim did that has already disavowed that story. They've already said that that's not true. They recommend a watermark to each, and they provide a watermark for each state, but the states ultimately print their own. So we'll see if that was true or not. I have heard that. I hope it's true, but they've publicly disavowed it. That, of course, they could be disavowing it as a form of disinformation because it really looks like they're trying to give the Democrats enough rope to hang themselves with. And so far, it seems to be working rather gloriously. And even what Biden is doing, has anybody noticed that to make a backdrop like that, you got to order that in advance? And with a lot of things still kind of locked down, that means they ordered that weeks in advance, that this was really planned. And they were expecting to get away with it. And calling yourself the president-elect when you're not the president-elect is probably, well, actually, that's covered under, I forget which code it is, but it's a federal crime. It comes under treason and subversive activities. Because you are subverting the government by claiming that you have been elected president when you haven't. And the formal count right now, as far as the electoral college votes, I think Trump has about 250 and Biden has 220, and that's with some of those states still disputed anyway. If they audit all the states, Biden probably has almost nothing. Because relatively few people are going to vote for the guy that was okay with riots. That's going to vote for the guy that, I mean, can you imagine that we're supposed to believe Pennsylvania voted for Biden when he already promised he was going to eliminate an industry that is like 1/3 of their economy, directly or indirectly, because it's probably about 1 million energy sector jobs in Pennsylvania. And then the people that work those jobs, well, they buy stuff from everybody else. So if they lose their jobs, that hurts the whole state. People are going to vote for the guy that's basically going to completely eviscerate their state's economy. I don't think so. You might have a large contingent that still would because they're idiots, or just totally committed to this whole communist nonsense. But your Joe Average, your working guy, that guy ain't voting for Biden. Same thing for Michigan. They're going to vote for the guy who wants to ship jobs to China over the guy that saved the auto industry. I don't think so. And in Michigan, they're finding a lot of reports of voter fraud, massive voter fraud. I think that was a state where they had thousands and thousands of people 120 years old voting, which is a statistical impossibility because there's probably not even 1,000 people 120 years old in the world. Never mind in a handful of counties in Michigan. So that's just impossible. And then you have the statistical impossibility that every single time Trump pulls ahead, Biden gets just enough votes to pass him. That is impossible. It violates Benford's law, which is something they use in accounting and other things to find statistical anomalies so they can catch you. It's how they catch accountants who are cheating and skimming. It's how the American government figures out whether other countries are rigging their elections. And yeah, I've read about that thing with the watermarks in a few places. I don't think it's true. I hope it is, but I don't think it's true. And quite frankly, we probably don't need that route. And here's why. Contesting these votes, and with all the evidence that they're going to have, they won't have enough time to hash out all the evidence in court as far as the voter fraud, but they have enough signed affidavits and enough people willing to testify under oath that this is happening, and enough video evidence to make a convincing enough argument that could probably work. But then there's also the constitutional argument that according to the Constitution, the only votes that count are the ones that arrive by 8 p.m. on election day. Everything else gets thrown out. So all these miracle votes that Biden got that were only for him at 3 o'clock in the morning on ballots that were only marked for the presidency and nothing else, according to the Constitution, those are thrown out. Throw out all those, Trump wins in a landslide. So if they go that route, Trump wins in a landslide. And if they still don't go that route, well, if Trump can pressure the various election boards to not certify the results, then Congress has to vote on it. And that goes by state. It doesn't go by the number of representatives. One state, one vote. So the House would vote on president and the Senate would vote on the vice president. Well, the Republicans control 31 states. Guess who wins that? And they have to vote, and either they vote on party lines or they commit suicide for their party. At this point, the only hope that the Democrats would have would be a military coup, which is probably not going to happen because Trump just fired the guy that would have led that military coup. And by the way, who do you think gave them hammer and scorecard? Now, I'm not 100% sure of that, but I got a strong feeling it was Mark Esper, because out of everybody in the Department of Defense, who's the one guy who could get a copy of that software and take it home with him without anybody asking questions? The Secretary of Defense. But somebody gave it to the Democrats, and they got caught. So it's going to play out very interestingly. Another thing we got to pray for is about the potential for violence, because the other side, the media, is working overtime with a psychological warfare to convince them that Biden is the legitimate winner. And all the stupid people and all the left-leaning people are going to believe it. And when Trump is vindicated, those people are going to get violent, or they're going to want to get violent. So we need to pray and intercede about that. Don't listen to these prophets who are telling you, "Oh, we need unity right now." Those preachers are paid off. Those preachers are in Soros's back pocket. And let's be real here. Do you really think that the government has allowed Benny Hinn to make billions of dollars over the last few decades tax-free because they just like him? You really think they're letting Creflo and the rest of them make all that money tax-free because the government's just nice to preachers? Of course not. They are part of a system of control. That's why they spent decades telling you not to get involved in politics. They're talking about it a lot now in the last couple of decades, but for the most part, it's been this policy of disinvolvement, or even what they call pietism, where you're supposed to act as if you're so spiritual you don't care about these things, when these things are spiritual. Daniel cared about politics. Isaiah cared about politics. David cared about politics. The prophet Samuel cared about politics. Moses. All of the major prophets of Scripture were directly involved in politics, and most of the rest. But you're not supposed to care about something that affects literally just about every area of your life. And this isn't just about America. This is an attack on all of humanity. And then there's the crowd that thinks that this is the end, and the new world order is coming now, and this is the time that we're like an inch away from the rapture. I don't think so. I might be proven wrong, but my educated guess here, I'm not saying God told me this. When I tell you God told me, I'll tell you God told me. And so far, I've never had a predictive prophecy that didn't come true, because I know well enough to keep my mouth shut and not say that God said unless God said. So right now I'm giving my educated opinion. We gotta be praying. Some of us who can fast, we need to fast. This is a war. Maybe you can't do a whole lot. Maybe you can't rally the troops. You can rally you. There's some small part in this that you can do, if only through fasting and prayer. You have some share in this war. It is not the weapons of my warfare or your warfare. It says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We were never meant to fight alone. And we better not let this president fight alone. He's been fighting for us. There will come a day where we will have to answer why we didn't fight. Why we didn't take up our responsibility. And I believe this is a fight we can win, and that we will win. But I think God has been waiting for us to stand up. Because the other side is absolutely diabolical. You know what they're planning here in Canada? I'm an American, but I'm stuck in Canada right now. They're planning to do away with all private property. Force you to take a COVID vaccine, and if you don't want it, they're already building concentration camps. That is the future that the Democratic Party, really the Communist Party, wants. Of absolute control of every aspect of human life. When they say crazy things, believe them. Remember that a few years ago they were talking about burning things down, and people laughed at them because they were a bunch of soy boys. And look at this, they did it. When AOC is talking about making lists, well, they're still making those lists. Goodness, just today the Lincoln Project doxed a couple of lawyers. When they say they want to do crazy stuff, believe them, because they want to, and they probably will at least try. So in closing, I'm going to say this. This is a time to put on our big boy pants and our big girl pants and fight like the fate of the world depends on it. And who knows? You might be the one to turn the tide of the battle. Who says it's going to be some big shot that gets us the win? It might be you. It might be your prayers. It might be you crying out to God. You never know. So saints, stay alert, stay awake. Pray that the truth will prevail, and that justice and judgment comes for all who have have taken part in this tremendously treasonous plot. Brother Sam signing out. Where we go on.